Well, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to the MCLive for May. This is the 16th. We are so glad that you have joined us this evening. Tonight we have a special offering for us by the Reverend Sarah Strozel-Kagi. She will talk to us about American Baptist alphabet soup. So what do all of our acronyms mean, and how do they all go together, and how do they each partner or partners relate to one another? So Sarah Strozel-Kagi comes to us from our Ministers Council leadership team. She serves as the coordinator of chapter representatives, and she's also the pastor at Royersford Baptist Church in Royersford, Pennsylvania. So just before I hand it over to Sarah, I'd love to open us in a word of prayer together. So I invite you now to settle yourself into a space that feels comfortable, to close your eyes as you feel called and comfortable, and we will begin. Holy God, thank you for this time, this evening, for us to gather together. Thank you for a moment for us to pause in our day and sit with one another in this virtual space. We are grateful for the opportunity to fellowship with one another and to learn from one another. Be with us, guide our conversation, that we might be curious to learn more and dive deeper into this denominational understanding, how everyone and all relationships are woven together to make this ministry come alive, so that we may serve as the hands and feet of Christ. All of this we pray in your name of love. Amen. Amen. All right, Sarah, if you're ready, I will hand all things over to you. And afterwards, when Sarah's finished, we'll open up for a time of discussion or questions or comments that we might have.
Yes, great. Well, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you all of you for joining. I see some friendly, familiar faces. Hi, Pastor Bill, and some new friends as well. And I'm just delighted to be here with you all, and those of you who may join us on a recording later. It's good to know your presence is here as well. As Rebecca mentioned, I currently serve as the pastor of Royersford Baptist Church in Royersford, Pennsylvania. I often give my geographic location as it relates to Philadelphia, because a lot of people know where Philadelphia is. But with this group, I can tell you I'm about 10 miles northwest of Valley Forge, because of course Baptists know Valley Forge is the motherland. When I was little, my parents are both American Baptist pastors, and I always used to hear about Valley Forge, where all the denominational stuff happened. And I thought it was kind of like Oz, oh, that magical land. I can tell you it's not like Oz. It's pretty plain and normal, but a beautiful area as well. So my proximity to Valley Forge means that I have a lot of touch points with our various denominational offices. And I actually have spent time, I worked with international ministries for a while, and I worked with home mission societies for a while. So I've had the inside look on some of our denominational family. And so how this particular session came about was, it was about a year ago. Our Ministers Council leadership team was meeting for a retreat, and we said, all right, what are all the pieces we're dealing with? Even those of us who have been in the American Baptist world for some time get confused about all the different moving pieces. And so Rebecca was there and Jackie was there when we took some time to put up on a big whiteboard all of our different American Baptist entities and how they relate. And at the end, we had this big web of messiness and beauty. And we decided, if we are having some trouble understanding this, then maybe everyone else is too. And so let's sit down and talk about this and try to figure out who's who and what's what and how we do and don't relate. So I just want to preface this by saying things change, things shift. So this information is accurate to the best of my knowledge, to my latest knowing, but there might have been some shifts in some of the structures. And so please correct me if I'm wrong, and don't hold me to this in a court of law. So with that caveat, as we know in our American Baptist life, I'm just going to review basic polity 101. The local church is the name of the game. The local church has all the power. The local church has all the decision making. The local church is where it's at. And so I think sometimes we can forget that, especially as local church pastors. It doesn't always feel like we have all the power, but really that's where the heart of what we do, where it all happens. And as we move out from there, of course, we have associations. In some regions, they're areas, they go by some different names there. We have our regions, of course, and then the big one, the denomination that kind of unites us all. But what is the denomination in a decentralized denomination such as ours? So a lot of you will probably initially think of what I would call the big three branches of what we call the denomination. And that is the office of the General Secretary, international ministries handling our international work, and American Baptist Home Mission Societies handling our more domestic mission work. And let's take a deeper look into each of these. So IM, International Ministries. This organization predates the denomination, as it were. We're coming up on 210 years for those who like to keep track of those kind of dates. And this is all things global. If it's happening outside of the United States and Puerto Rico, then it is within the realm of international ministries. IM is where all of our global servants and missionaries, where they report to. They handle volunteers who are working globally. And annually, we collect the World Mission Offering, and that goes to support our international partners. That one's pretty straightforward. Then we start getting a little bit crazy. We have ABHMS, American Baptist Home Mission Societies, formerly called National Ministries, or NM. Do you see we're already starting to throw out all of those letters there? And home mission deals with things domestically within the US and Puerto Rico. This is where Judson Press, which is our American Baptist publishing house, they reside within ABHMS. We also have ABPS, which is now morphed into MCLive. That's the old profile system. So if you're looking for a job, MCLive also has other ways of connecting through just lots of different resources and connections there. Home Mission Society is also where our chaplains are endorsed. It's a little bit odd to me anyway. All statements here are my opinions alone. There are no facts, but that our chaplaincy is endorsed in our mission society, not within our general office of the General Secretary, but somewhere along the line, that's where it landed, and that's how it's ended up. So we have our ecclesiastical endorsement. And some of you may recall, the reason it's kind of faded there on the screen, educational ministries. Educational ministries folded into ABHMS about 20 years ago now, 15, 20 years ago. So now all of the educational things, as educational institutions that we support and all of that, now those things reside within home mission societies as well. I know that there's a lot of other stuff that ABHMS does as well, but we could spend an entire hour just talking about each of these individual organizations. So this is sort of the 30,000 foot view of what these groups do. And then we have OGS, the Office of the General Secretary. I sort of, cynically we'll call this the bureaucracy of the denomination. This is where, the paperwork goes through OGS, sort of the everyday stuff that we need to file goes through OGS. When someone thinks, hey, I need a statement from the American Baptists, which by the way, we don't really do because the local church is where it's at, but they would go to the Office of the General Secretary. Of course, the head, the General Secretary right now is the Reverend Dr. Gina Jacobs Strain. And so she is kind of, when you see like the Pope and other high leaders of churches, that's Reverend Dr. Gina right there. Although we don't give her as much power as the Pope, but I wish we did. But the Office of the General Secretary is where the Board of General Ministries, they come out of the Office of the General Secretary. And the Board of General Ministries has representatives from all of the regions, all of the affiliated groups are represented at that table there. And that's where the big decisions of the denomination happen. So when there are bylaws being rewritten, when things like that are going on, that's going through the Board of General Ministries. Of course, then that's all approved at the biennials by us, the voting people, but that's where the work happens through the Board of General Ministries. Board of General Ministries and OGS also is where our caucuses live. We have, I didn't put them all down because I knew I was going to miss one, but we have the Native American caucus and the Black caucus and the Women's caucus, Hispanic, Latino caucus, and I know there are several others as well. This is also where any task forces live. So the General Secretary may call together at any time a group of concerned American Baptists to work on particular issues. We've had the Burma Task Force that is very active and does a lot of really great advocacy work for Burma. We have an anti-racism task force, and there's others that come and go as the need arises. Within OGS, that's also where our regions, where they kind of live. And the regions are they're sort of overseen in some ways as much as a non-hierarchy group oversees something by the REMC, the Regional Executive Ministers Council. We have 33 or 34 regions. It depends if you count Alaska as a region. Some do, some don't. But so 33 or 34 regions across the United States and Puerto Rico, all headed up by an executive minister that meets with the REMC. Within OGS, we also have American Baptist Women in Ministry and Transition Ministries. OGS is also where our biennial comes from. OGS works in collaboration with the other branches, but they're sort of the one that signs on the dotted line when it comes to planning the biennial. All right. So when we look at all of these, we have the big three, and then we have other two, and together they form the NEC, the National Executive Council. So this is those big three along with MMBB. Hopefully you all know MMBB because you are enrolled. This isn't an advertisement for MMBB, but you do want to be involved if you are an American Baptist minister, as well as ABWM, American Baptist Women's Ministries, which is different from American Baptist Women in Ministry. Is anyone else confused yet? Yes, we are. Women's ministries and women in ministry, the women's ministry group sort of birthed the women in ministry group about, what are we looking at, Rebecca, 44 years ago now? But women in ministry is specifically for clergy women who are serving either in churches or chaplaincy or whatever roles. Women's ministries is for lay and clergy. Now you may be asking yourself, why does women's ministries have a seat at the National Executive Council, but AB Men does not? And that is because It used to be that educational ministries had a seat at this table. And when educational ministries was folded into ABHMS, there were only men on the National Executive Council. And I don't know who it was that first said it, but God bless them. They looked around and said, this isn't right. We need to make sure that we have more voices at the table that aren't just men. And so the women's ministries was invited to have a seat at the National Executive Council. Interestingly enough, they didn't make a plan for what happens when it's all women. And I'm eager for that day, not just because I like to see a little, feathers get ruffled, but because I'm just eager to see the day when all women are on the National Executive Council. So right now we have these 5 groups that meet as the National Executive Council. So some of you may be thinking, okay, 1 great hour of sharing, where does that fit in here? This is an offering that many of our churches take. We hear about it often in relation to when disasters take place, both domestically and internationally. 1 great hour of sharing is a combined effort. It's actually an ecumenical effort beyond just ABC, but within our sphere, ABHMS, OGS, and IM work together. They have a joint committee called the World Relief Committee. And that's where our 1 great hour of sharing, where all our offerings go to and our funds, and decisions are made about how we're dispersing those funds when disaster strikes or when there's a need for that. Let's see what we have. Oh, this is just my, if you're a graphic person, right? So we have the globe, the domestic, the money, the women, and that's not supposed to be a circus tent. It's supposed to be a big tent. It's just so happens it's a circus tent. Read into that what you will. But we often refer to ourselves as a big tent denomination because we are so diverse and so rich in our diversity, and we in every sense of the word. And so there's room for everyone in this big tent. So now that we have the NEC figured out, let's talk about the NLC, the National Leadership Council, different from the National Executive Council. We take those 5 seats at the National Executive Council and we add in our regional executive ministers, our historical society, the Extension Corporation, the foundation, and the Ministers' Council, that's us here. And that forms the National Leadership Council. The National Leadership Council meets annually. They don't exactly have any power per se. This isn't a group that can change, with the stroke of a pen, the direction of the denomination or make any grand changes like that. But they do work on vision. They do work on ways that the different organizations can collaborate and work together to strengthen our churches and our ministries. So that is the NLC. Beyond that, we have RMO and AMO. RMOs are related ministry organizations. AMOs are associated ministry organizations. What that means, no one has been able to tell me. Your guess is as good as mine. If you look at the groups that are listed there, it doesn't exactly make sense why one might be in one group and one might be in another. So as best I could guess, that they were sort of grouped together at 2 different times and somehow given 2 different names, and that stuck. So often I have found that that is actually how things get named and grouped within our denominational family. But they basically function the same way. So these are independent in that they generally have their own boards, their own leaders, their own bylaws and that sort of thing, but they are affiliated or related or associated, sometimes viewed as missions of our various projects. I know, like, for example, Rainbow Acres, which is listed as an associated ministry organization, is a ministry I believe it's in Arizona. That's something that's often, there are some churches that adopt that as a special ministry. Why it sits there and others don't, again, no one's given me a solid answer for that. But these are related to us. They're part of the ABC family. They're supported by parts of our American Baptist life, but they're not necessarily represented on the NLC, although some of them are. You'll see the Historical Society, they do have a seat on NLC. Women's Ministries, that's part of the NEC and NLC. So if someone figures out the rhyme or reason there, please let the rest of us know. And then we also have the professional ministries team. The groups listed there are all part of the professional ministries team. They meet about 2 times a year. You'll see Ministers Council does have a seat there. Rebecca, weren't you just there this week or next week or sometime?
Yeah, it's Tuesday, next Tuesday.
Tuesday, all right.
Yeah.
So, and all representatives from all of these groups meet as part of the professional ministries team. And it's basically a group that looks at ways to support clergy and ministries. What are the things that are happening on the ground? What are the ways that they can help support that? Who has the resources and is able to share them and make those things happen? Yeah, so that's the PMT. And then we have other Baptist groups and organizations that aren't exclusively American Baptist, aren't necessarily represented in any of those different groups, but that many of us relate to. We have groups like BPFNA, Baptist Peace Fellowship of North America, the BJC, Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, BNG, Baptist News Global, a news source, AWAB, the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists, the Baptist World Alliance. I know that there are others that I have left off or are probably not even aware of, because there are so many. And these are groups that are often supported by multiple different Baptist groups. So the Cooperative Baptists and Southern Baptists, Alliance of Baptists, and other Baptist-like friends. And many of our churches support various ones of these organizations. So you'll hear these acronyms being thrown around quite a bit. That was a very quick walk through our various pieces of our denominational life. And so I wanted to pause there. I'll pull up the this map once again. And are there any questions of how these groups are relating, what's going on? I'm happy to share some more. Hi, Pastor Lubin. Were there any groups here that you, I know we have a number of folks who have been around the family for a while, just so to speak, any groups that you've never heard of or were new to you this time around?
I had heard about, this is Stephen, and I had heard about the NEC, but not the National Leadership Council. If I had heard of that, I've forgotten about it. And it seems a very strange kind of duplication there.
Yeah, I agree. I was working within these organizations for a while before I actually figured out that the NEC and the NLC were 2 different groups. We'll call this, keep this one off the record. Maybe, record, if you, the recording, pause the recording, don't really, but the NEC is the heads of all the organizations. What I imagine those meetings to be like, I've never been in one, but I imagine there's a lot of formalities and head nodding and yes, this is what we do. The NLC is a much, much bigger group because we have all those other organizations. that's where work actually gets done. That's where, there's so many more voices at the table, and really bringing in what's happening on the ground in ministry. In all of my experience with working in these organizations, it's very much at the heart of all of their missions to support the local church, because that is the heart of our denomination. And it's easy to lose sight of the local church when you're sitting in an office far away from that. So I think the NLC is what helps to sort of keep all of the work grounded in what's really happening and what the real needs are. And that's why it's an important seat also that the Ministers' Council has a seat at the table for the National Leadership Council, because of all of these groups, Ministers' Council is the one where it's real life pastors doing real life local ministry every day, whereas these other groups are doing really wonderful, worthwhile ministries that are taking place outside of the local church and in different contexts. So that's a really important seat that we hold. And I know Matt Sturdivant, our president, and Rebecca Driscoll, our vice president, really take very seriously their responsibility to show up to those meetings. And as many of you probably know, our Ministers' Council is a working board. And so we don't have an executive director where our head is our board and our president and vice president, who have full-time lives and jobs. But it's the commitment of this board that we show up to these meetings, so that we can be the voice of pastors, everywhere. And so to that end, if there are things that you are concerned about, if there are questions you have, we are the voice. We are here to amplify those voices. And so bring them to us. That's what Ministers' Council is here for. That was a shameless plug for Ministers' Council. I didn't even plan that, but.
We are grateful for it.
Question, Sarah.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone. Bless you. So we can say that the NEC, it's the group that has the legal responsibility of the denomination.
I would say that lies within the office of the General Secretary at the end of the day. The NEC is all of the heads of the different groups, but I don't think that they're like bound by any bylaws or anything like that. But the office of the General Secretary, for example, that's where like our tax exempt status lies there. That's where all of our bylaws are. That's where the voting and stuff that we come up with as the denomination happens there. So the Executive Council is kind of affirming the work of the General Secretary. Hopefully, or not always, because we're Baptists, so we don't always affirm one another. But there's not really any actual power.
So it's more to gather ideas.
Yes.
Yeah. But that also is said of the other soup, the NL whatever.
Yep. NLC.
NLC. That it's broader, more people there. But the office of the General Secretary as per se is not there. It's just the NSC plus the rest.
Yeah, so the office of the General Secretary is represented at the NLC. Both with the General Secretary participates, as well as like the head of the American Baptist Women in Ministry. I know there are several others from that office who participate in the NLC meetings. So that they are absolutely present there and listening and working and doing all that.
Thank you.
Yeah. One of the So many of you are probably familiar with what was formerly the Holy Donut, which was our mission building in Valley Forge that we occupied for just about 50 years. And that's where all of these offices, with the exception of MMBB, they've always been in New York. But all of the other offices had their physical office space in this one building. And that building was sold about 4 or 5 years ago now. And there was a lot of concern at the time of the denomination is breaking up, which again, what is the denomination, right? A lot of concern of how are we going to work together if, we're not all living in the same building anymore. And as someone who held several office spaces in that building, let me tell you, it was a blessing for that building to be sold. While it was definitely sad to see that era of ministry and that, physical building no longer our property, it had served its purpose and it was time to move on. And so all of the offices now occupy separate buildings, but they're still all within a half a mile of each other. So it's not like we're all, moving far apart. And in some ways, it was almost beneficial to move away from one another because it was really easy to ignore each other in the same building. You go up your own staircase, you find your own office, you shut the door, and you're done. This way, we had to be really intentional about, I'm going to seek out my partners at IM and see what they're doing. I'm going to go over to the office of the general secretary and have a meeting over there. So from what I have seen and observed, and when I was working there as well, the fears of, this is breaking up the family really have not come to fruition, that it really, there still very much is, collaboration in the same places it was before. And we no longer are occupying a building bigger than our needs. We were able to be good stewards of that space there. So if you're ever in the area, I'd be happy to show you around where the office once was and where the new offices are.
Sarah, do we need a tour guide in order to find everybody?
I can be your tour guide, Pastor Bill. I would be happy.
Okay, good.
I'll even find you dinner afterwards.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Sarah, I really appreciated this is Stephen again. I appreciated your presentation. And I can remember decades ago asking about an org chart, and I'm glad you didn't try to confuse us with an organizational chart. The other thing I would comment on is, as you know and can explain better than I can, but these organizations are held together by a covenant. It's really not a legal binding agreement like you would have in some other denominations, but it's a covenantal relationship.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephen. And I think that's a really powerful statement of our Baptist values, of who we are and how we relate to each other. And I think there's been some concern, especially in recent years, about the strength and the power of that covenant. And I think there's a couple things at play here. We all know that the state of the church, the state of organized religion, looks very different today than it did 10, 15, 20 plus years ago. And so our organizations aren't as fully supported as they once were because our local church isn't often as supported. We had so many local churches that were able to give. That's not the case anymore. So like we collect the United Mission offering, right? And that goes to support all the different areas of ministry. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I know it's nowhere near what it used to be. And it's not enough to support on that offering alone. So our organizations have had to look at other ways to support themselves. So I know that like there's a lot of churches that relate to IM that aren't necessarily American Baptist churches. Likewise, there are a lot of groups that relate to ABHMS that aren't necessarily historical American Baptist partners. MMBB certainly has expanded beyond the American Baptists in terms of the populations they serve. I personally think that this is a good thing. We are finding ways to survive and thrive in a time when other similar organizations are not. And so, yes, it means that, we're not, we might not pass the American Baptist purity test all of the time, or there might be times where our partners aren't all at the table because they have to go find funding somewhere else and meet with that. So it's different now. It's definitely different now than it was, even 10 years ago. I personally don't think different's a bad thing, but it stretches our understanding of that covenant. And I think at the end of the day, what I hold faith in is that even though our organizations, our different branches might be reaching further out, that they still are tied by this covenant. And that's something that they do hold dear. Are there any other questions or noticings?
I'm very impressed, Sarah, that you have gotten all of this figured out. I think I've been in this denomination for 50 years, and I'm seeing more of a logical presentation of the structure than I've ever been able to grasp. So good for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Part of it is just living in it, being so close to it and having worked in these. I also, this was not alone. I mentioned that, last year at our Ministers Council retreat, there were several of us, and we had this up on the whiteboard for like 3 days, and we'd keep saying, oh no, we forgot this group. Oh, what about this one? So it absolutely is a labor of love amongst colleagues. And I'm certain if someone's watching this recording and saying, you forgot my organization, please, deepest apologies from me. That's not my intention at all, but there's a lot of us to keep track of. I've often heard in several of the offices I've worked at within the denomination, that working with American Baptists is like herding cats. So, it's a job. It's a lot.
And another question.
Hmm?
Is the work that was approved on the 2011 biennial that changed part of how to do business in the organization, it affected some of this, or this is new or rearranged from that rebuilding almost 10, 12 years ago?
That is a very good question. I don't know that any of that directly impacted this. I mean, it impacted everybody, but I don't know that it necessarily changed the way that these different groups interact on their own. They have all always been independent organizations of one another. Both IM and ABHMS predate the denomination itself. So there's sort of this strange, like, who comes out on top. So I can't say with 100% certainty, Julio, but I believe that those changes were more mostly affected the office of the general secretary.
And how's the general board and other stuff work, but the overall denomination relationship
that bureaucracy
existed before that. Okay.
I think it's so wonderful to have the larger scope. I think about, I serve a local congregation in Massachusetts, and I remember before I worked with any regional or national offices, I had no idea that all of this was happening, right? And so I often think about my congregants who aren't as connected to all of this, and how amazing it is that we can be so connected, that we have all of these relationships and partnerships and resources to draw on. And like, what would it look like to really emphasize those and strengthen those? Because sometimes I feel like we're just not using them as much. I'll share something with my congregation and they'll be like, wait, that's a thing? Yep. And it has been for decades or even hundreds of years. And yeah, how do we use these relationships to strengthen our own local ministries, right? How do we become a stronger, closer denomination?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Rebecca. I think there are so many, definitely our congregants and a lot of our fellow colleagues who don't know all of the pieces and know all of the resources. And that's why I always say, like, ask, reach out, don't suffer alone. Whatever suffering looks like, don't create alone either. Rebecca and I were just saying, as we were signing on, I was telling her about a program that I use for graphics, like, find the ways that we can support one another. And because while the local church is absolutely key in this, the local church isn't alone. And one of the most amazing things I think about being American Baptist is how connected we are with the world. When we look at the work that Home Mission is doing across the United States and Puerto Rico, the reach that we have within that. When we look at our global servants all across the world and the reach we have there, it's far more than any local church could do on their own. And so, claim it, own it, and claim it, and participate in it, because it's such a gift in today's world to be connected in that way.
Reverend Carol asked, where can we get the alphabet soup charts to help inform our congregations?
That is a great question. I can make them available on the Ministers Council website. So stay tuned and we'll send it out soon. Thanks. Any other questions or comments before we head off to bed?
Just a word of thanks. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
A great job.
Good job. Yep.
Thank you. Very good job. That was yes, one of the best service that I had given when I was on the World Relief Committee years ago. And so that's a great affection for the family.
There's good work being done there. Absolutely.
And also we want to have, Jackie wants to make an announcement before we wrap up, just in case.
Yeah, so very glad to be here, and so very glad that we're recording each and every one of these sessions. You may not travel to our website very often, but you'll see an archive there from many years of programs and some really interesting conversations. We're actually in the process of moving things to YouTube, so if there are gaps in what you see on the website from past sessions, that's because they're in transit. I want to give you a warm invitation to next month's session on Thursday evening, June 20th. We'll be focusing on sabbatical testimony, sabbatical planning, with a colleague panel being assembled now. So please, if you yourself are personally interested in that topic, come and be a part of the prayer circle, even if you don't have a looming sabbatical. and help us to spread the word about that conversation in your colleague circles with those who may be at the brink of one. I look forward to really good fellowship and sharpening during that session.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jackie, for that announcement and encouragement for all sabbatical dreaming and planning and preparing that might be happening for us and for our friends and colleagues in ministry. So if there's no other comments or questions or discussions, I'll close us in prayer. We're all ready for that. All right. I invite you into a moment of prayer with me. Oh, holy God, thank you for all the connections and relationships that we find in our denomination, old friends and deep roots, and new friends and new sprouts forming, new things to come as we dive into the richness of this denomination and all of its connections. Thank you for the wisdom of years that have gone by and for the dedication in the years to come. Bless each of us as we leave this space tonight, that we may know your presence and your love, that we may be able to share your joy with all that we meet. All of this we pray in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
If anything, it's good to see Sarah's face for your face.